A young couple who I knew, Robert Weaver and his girlfriend, visited the Alton Barnes Formation, which was then brand new, very early one morning. And they walked in. She decided to sit at one end, and he wanted to take some photographs. She sat down, and he walked down one of the spirals. And after literally just 2 or 3 minutes, she thought, oh, I'm going to go down and join him. She stood up. He was nowhere to be seen. She thought he must be lying down in one of the circles. She followed him down, and in the 5th circle down, she found his camera. There was no way he could have got out of the field. He had disappeared. She searched around, she panicked, there was nobody else around. She went back, got in the car, and she phoned me. I was living fairly close to Alton Barnes, and I said, call the police and I'll be right there. The police came, and there was an immediate notice put on it, which is the English equivalent of a press blackout. And I was sworn to several months of secrecy. He disappeared. He's never been seen since. How many people believe that story? It's an absolute lie. It's a good story. I made it up. And the crop circles are entirely benign. Nothing horrible. Nothing horrible has ever happened, but I always start with this kind of thing to make it clear how in our humanness we are desperate for the scary. We are desperate for horror stories. We are desperate for the dark side. And what I want to tell you is that if anybody is here tonight looking for scary stories, you heard it. I just gave it you. There's nothing else to do with the crop circles that is anything other than entirely benign, supportive, and loving. And what I'm going to try and show you tonight is that there is a prodigious intelligence involved here, and a prodigious intelligence which seems to have some kind of agenda. We don't know what's going on, but I think Patricia and I will undertake to tell you what we believe to be true now. We're not going to whiz anything up because it's whizzy enough as it is. It's the truth as we now know it. The circles are appearing in about 20 countries, but the heartland is around here, the southwest of England, and essentially around this area here. We're talking about a zone which is 2 hours' drive from London. It's very easy. Avebury is... Stonehenge is very well known as a stone circle. Avebury is a larger and, to many people, much more powerful ring of stones. This is Stonehenge, which has now, as you see, been very thoughtfully fenced off by the British government, so you can't caress the stones anymore. They felt that the stones were being worn away by the affection of hippies. This is Silbury Hill, which is, I mean, everything is within a zone. Silbury Hill is kind of close too. It's the largest man-made earthwork in Europe, and its function is, frankly, not totally known. Nobody's absolutely clear what's going on. Silbury Hill is related to the Avebury stone circle. There in the west is Glastonbury Tor, a natural hill over there, with obviously a man-made tower on it, and an amazing little village nestled below, which is where the annual Glastonbury Conference Symposium on crop circles takes place. A white horse. The earth cover is about 9 inches or a foot deep, and there are 7 white horses in Wiltshire. They are simply made by the cutting out of the earth cover over the stones. They're very, very large indeed, and they're always put on hillsides, so they form landmarks. Again, their function is unknown, but again, the crop circles seem to have some kind of affection for them. They give them a degree of attention. Alton Barnes is a little village which is the heartland of the heartland. An enormous amount happens here. And this is where some of the truly major breakthroughs have occurred in the evolution of the phenomenon. And there's the first circle. Now, essentially, I'm going to deal with the circles as circles very briefly. The crop is not damaged in any way. As you see, it is swirled very, very carefully. It continues to ripen and grow. If you look carefully at this lot, it's not only swirled in a spiral motion, it's twisted into hanks of crop. So there are several things going on there. The upper circle, that little circle, is what's known as grape shot. The grape shot, which are tending to disappear now, are small circles from about 2 feet to about 8 feet in diameter, which are generally held to be some kind of electrical charging point. The circles started to appear in the mid to late 70s and developed, as you see here, into circles and rings. Now, this is a very large circle with a very textured lay to the crop. I think one thing that's happened over the years is that the circle makers, whoever they might be, are developing greater and greater skills in their manipulation of terrestrial crops. This was a very important formation which signalled a massive change. Through the 70s and 80s, we had circles and rings, and as you'll be seeing in a moment, we had also quintuplets. This circle appeared, nothing has been like this before or since, in 1989, and it was the first realized appearance of straight lines. The first time straight lines were actually manifest. There's a standard swirl in the center, and if you look carefully, you can see that the perimeter of the circle has been separately swirled. And I would imagine that was done first to prevent the edge of the circle being impacted by the outward explosion of these 4 quadrants. That clearly the thing had to, if you like, a hem had to be put on the garment to allow everything to explode outwards in this way. This was a very important formation because it signalled the arrival of the straight line, which we'll be dealing with in a while. Now, before we come on to that, I want to come on to another phenomenon of the mid-80s, which was called the quintuplet, or dice 5 spot. This shows the kind of landscape we're dealing with here. Silbury Hill is over in that direction, and what you can see here are these man-made hills or tumuli, which are ancient constructions of some sort. So there is a constant magnetism between ancient artifacts of any sort and the crop circle phenomenon. This is a classic 5-spot quintuplet, and there's another one. Now this was a very famous one of the type known as the fat quintuplet for obvious reasons at Upton Scudamore. We'll be coming back to it. And this obviously was a thinner quintuplet which had developed orbital rings yet another. There was a huge range of sizes and proportions. Now these are some of the classic quintuplets of the later 80s, and there in the bottom left you can see the Upton Scudamore fat quintuplet. Now it occurred to me in the late 80s, early 90s, that there was something very important here. This was not an accident of nature, because there were a certain series of rules being obeyed. All of these are very nicely proportioned. We look at those. We don't have to be Leonardo da Vinci to feel kind of comfortable about the way they're set up. Now, here are the 4 rules. Rule number 1. The quintuplet was always substantially on a right-angle grid. That is, that axis and that axis were substantially 90 degrees apart. Number 2 and 3. Number 2, the centre circle was always bigger. Number 3, the 4 outer circles were always the same. And number 4, the outer satellites were always the same distance from the centre circle. These rules were never broken, and quite honestly, I was astonished to see them being broken this year in a crop circle in Germany for the first time. Not this year, this last season, 96, where the satellites were positioned tangibly at different distances from the centre circle. Now, let's look at this. If you're an architect, you're designing a building, you draw a grid. You want the columns at 30 feet, you draw a 30-foot grid. But that grid has no reality. You don't carve the grid into the floor to remind people. You simply use it to instruct the builder. And there are all kinds of mental constraints which are pieces of information you hand on. Now, we have the same thing here. Where was this right angle idea kept? Where was it held? It certainly never appeared in the fields. When you photographed these formations or measured them, you could see that there was a constant right angle. Where was the idea of a right angle held? Then, where was the idea that the centre circle should always be bigger held? And where was the idea that the 4 satellites should be smaller? Where was it kept? I did a series of diagrams in which I created drawings of crop circles which broke all the rules, and they look absolutely crummy. They look really rotten. We never had one that broke a rule. Where was the idea that all the satellites should be the same distance from the centre circle kept? Now, I would suggest that it can only be kept in mind. A mind, an intent, a will. It certainly wasn't a natural phenomenon. I mean, Mother Nature is not best known for inventing new phenomena on a Thursday afternoon in the mid-80s. It wasn't natural, despite the scientists' desperation to sledgehammer it into something that they could go to sleep around. But this idea of there being rules convinced me that there was a mind involved, and that mind had will and volition about it. Now here was something else which was astonishing. The Upton Scudamore quintuplet was analysed, and look at the geometry that could be laid over it. That is a pentagram. And if you laid a pentagram, if you designed a pentagram to precisely the size where its arms crossed on the center circle like that, on the mother circle, you found that the points of the stars formed a circle which precisely contained the satellites. Now, in our culture, we've learnt to associate the five-pointed star with magic or sorcery. We don't like it. But the five-pointed star is the root of our very own biology. Because if you go further into it, you find that there is a proportion in there which is an essential proportion of nature, which is that every one of these is a triangle. It has a 36-degree angle. Remember that as your homework. If you have a 36-degree angle on an isosceles triangle, you then create a very particular situation, and that is the base proportion to the long proportion, or the green to the red, is that. The green is 1, the red is 1.618. That is the golden proportion, the golden section. It exists throughout botanical, zoological, mammalian life on planet Earth. It was used as a sacred proportion in painting and in architecture, but it's less so now. It's one of the great secrets of our society. And our bodies are made up of elements which respect the golden proportion. Plants grow by respecting the golden proportion. If you take that top joint of your finger, that one there, and you measure it in units, it's best to do it in millimeters because you don't get, an inch is too big. So you measure that in millimeters. You then measure that joint in millimeters. You divide that into that, it will be 1.618, or pretty damn near it. And as I often suggest to audiences, you can have hours of fun in the comfort of your own home by taking your clothes off with somebody who's near to you and getting a tape measure and spending a happy evening measuring each other's bones and seeing, with a calculator as well, and just doing a series of divisions and seeing how often this number comes up repeatedly. But as I say, that number is a function of the golden section, one of the most ancient, sacred proportional systems on planet Earth. And if we go back to that, we find that whoever was the author of these crop circles is absolutely aware of that. Now this kind of concentrates the mind. Just what is going on and who's doing it? Who are these beings? I'm not going to go on much about geometry, but it helps you to understand. We're going to go on now into slicing the pizza. Very important. You've got a pizza here. You want to divide it into 3. It makes simply a threefold geometry. Now obviously that circuit is 360 degrees. You divide it into 3, that is 120 degrees. Threefold geometry, which is to do essentially with the way you slice the pizza. But there's something else which is very important, that in creating a threefold form, which in this case is the triangle, you create the containing circle, which hits the pointed bits, and the contained circle, which hits the flat bits. You have created a proportion between the small and the large. Fourfold geometry, you divide the pizza into 4, 90 degrees. But again, you're creating in fourfold geometry a square element which contains and is contained by two circles of different sizes. Fivefold and sixfold slices of pizza, and what do they produce? And a sevenfold slice of pizza. Now this is very important, this little sequence. What starts to happen with the fivefold is that you get two contained circles. One is contained by the flat bits, and one is called the arm crossing circle, which goes through the crossing of the arms. The fivefold system has been always associated with living systems, plant or animal. The sixfold system, again, has a contained circle and an arm crossing circle. The sixfold system is associated with the mineral realm. It's associated with the earth. Sevenfold, very important, and I beg you to remember this because it's going to kick you in the head at the end of the evening, right? The sevenfold system, which again has a contained circle and an arm crossing circle, is associated with the realm of spirit, with the realm of revelation, and with the eternal feminine. Now, we have had in the crop circles twofold, threefold, fourfold, fivefold, sixfold, gap, 8, 9, etc. 7 has been rigorously missed, and I have been waiting for years for a sevenfold geometry. Obviously, at the crudest level, the quintuplets, as you know, are simply a fourfold geometry. You divide the pizza into 4. I've been waiting for the evidence of sevenfold because it would seem to me that as soon as we were granted sevenfold, we were knocking on the door of revelation and we were perhaps entering the realm of spirit. That little circle I showed you, which exploded into 4 directions, was the precursor of this circle, which was really one of the first major linear circles. 1990, having dealt with circles and rings, the phenomenon suddenly developed into this kind of graphic, which obviously simply blew people away. I cannot tell you the effect this had on people. It was 300 feet long. I mean, just for scale, there's a human being. That's it from the air. From the other side, you can see the people in it. And the other thing, very interesting, you can see these little isolated boxes. Now, those have internal right angles. I mean, if you go into one of these corners, it's a hard right angle. How do you make a hard right angle in swept corn? I mean, it's astonishing. I used to be an architect and a designer and an engineer. I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to make an internal rectangle. And there they are again, closer to, and you can see the delicacy with which the corn is swept. There are the 2 boxes. Look at the precision of that. These lines, incidentally, are called tram lines. They are the tractor line the farmer uses for. There they are, you can see them much more clearly. Now, this is a famous field. You'll be seeing more of this field. This is called the East Field at Alton Barnes. But I put this slide on to show just how genial these events are. I mean, people are drawn to them like magnets. And here is another one of that series which aligns, if you look at it, with Silbury Hill, slightly off the screen, but that bit there is Silbury Hill, a man-made conical monument, and they never point at the centre of monuments. they always, when you look at them very carefully on a map, tangent one edge of them. This was a very important formation of 91, beautifully laid. It was a key. Again, nobody knew what they meant. It's a function of late 20th century humanity that we want to know what everything means. Nobody knows what this means. And nobody knows what this meant. Was it a key? A claw? Who knows? What happened was that there was a very powerful lay in that direction, a sweep downwards. And you can see a slight difference of colour where that downward sweep was overswept. And then when you came here, there was almost a parting, like the parting of hair. It went down that way and it zoomed down into that corner. And that's the parting. And at the bottom end, the lying down corn was combed into the standing up corn, so that you got one standing stem, one lying down stem, one standing, one lying down, one standing, one lying down. So you got an absolutely clean wall of corn with the sweep simply being combed into it. This was the gigantic Barbary Castle of 1991, which remains one of the classics of the crop circle thing. There it is, again you see, smaller, and we come in on it here. That shows one of the corners of the triangle, just to give you an idea of the architecture when you're in it and the scale of it. The side of one of these triangles was 180 feet. And for 91, it was simply mind-blowing. There was no way of digesting this. I mean, it was shocking in its elaboration and its detail and its scale and its size. Nobody had ever seen anything like it before. And it remains one of the classics of the early 90s. This was a Mandelbrot set of the same year, 91. The Mandelbrot set is a computer-generated pattern which results from chaos theory and chaos mathematics. When analysed, it is not a perfect Mandelbrot diagram, but it's so metaphorically near it, it's undeniably a Mandelbrot. Now, I put this in not because I'm particularly attached to these formations, but because I want you to have a look at this field, which is related to Stonehenge. This is one of the main roads going to the west. This, I believe, was Stonehenge before it was fenced off. But we're going to be revisiting this Stonehenge field. This again is still 91, huge rings. I mean, you can get a sense of the scale from the number of tram lines. Those tram lines are at least 30 and occasionally 70 feet apart, depending on the farmer's equipment. These were called dolphins for obvious reasons. They were clearly rather fish-like. They are, incidentally, the only mammals that have been represented in the crop circle. But it was a very interesting family. Now, here again, there's one there, and this one again, if you follow it through, is tangenting Silbury Hill. There's another one there, which has no relationship really to Silbury Hill. But these were huge and very well laid, and there were 9 of them. And interestingly, they existed in pairs. Each one seemed to have a twin, apart from this sad little isolated one who was on his own and was called the Turtle. And he arrived below power lines, actually, and so he put to rest the desperate theory that these were in some way the landing marks of visiting craft. But there's something far more interesting than this. A researcher was very